Hi, I'm Jim Huss, and welcome to Killing Your Heroes, the show where it isn't about history, it's about perspective. This video is the first in a 4-part series about slavery in America. In part 1, I'm going to give a brief background of slavery and what led to slavery in America. With that being said, slavery is a condition that has been present in some form or another on just about every part of the planet. If prostitution is the oldest profession on the planet, farming is number 2, and slavery is a very close third. With that being said, slavery in most instances throughout time was the lesser of two evils, with the other option being a painful death by sword or knife. We know this because when captives were given the choice of being enslaved or killed, the vast majority chose slavery. Also, slavery was prolific throughout human history for so long because slaves just didn't kill themselves en masse when enslaved. Slavery can be broken down into 3 major categories. The first being debt slavery. In this form of slavery, if you owed a debt and could not pay it, you would be willingly or sometimes unwillingly forced to work as a slave to pay off your debt. In exchange for food and shelter, you would work an additional amount of time. And in exchange for food and water for your family, you would work even more time. Not always, but usually, this type of slavery was almost entirely about paying off the debt. The next type of slavery, and the type of slavery most common in the Americas, is chattel slavery. This is slavery where the slave is property. The slave almost always did not have personhood. Everything from forced labor, torture, sexual assault, forced religious conversion, and being denied dominion over one's family were things permissible for masters to do to their slaves. This type of slavery, as discussed, was in the Americas, but was also the form of slavery in Rome, ancient Greece, and so many other societies throughout history. Now to clarify, just because a master was able to do all the unspeakable acts just mentioned did not mean that all masters engaged in such acts. In Rome, for instance, there are many instances of slaves living normal lives with salaries and freedoms, but they could not choose their job or their master. But to be clear, many, if not most slaves, did not live cushy lives like this. The third form of slavery is honor or cultural slavery. This is an often overlooked and under-discussed form of slavery. It was quite common in, for lack of a better term, primitive societies, and was known to exist in Native American cultures and Sub-Saharan African cultures. Basically, in this type of slavery, the slave is chattel, but there is an honor to the slavery. By that I mean these societies use slavery as a form of circular economics. Instead of fighting to the death, the losing side would become slaves. But the slaves would be respected because it was inevitable that the losing tribes would assemble some allies, start another fight, win that fight, reclaim their people, and enslave the winners of the last skirmish. So there was no need to mistreat the slaves, as they would very likely become the masters in the near future. And this would constantly go back and forth where every tribe kind of gets ahead temporarily by getting extra help and extra resources through these enslavements. And it kind of worked. Everyone ended up getting ahead in the long run. This honor slavery played a key role in the early transatlantic slave trade, but before we get there, we need to discuss why Africa was the source of slaves for the New World. Slavery was present in Europe throughout most of its history, but with most of Europeans being poor and destitute, there was no significant need or amount of slaves after the fall of Rome. But Africa gets involved in this in 1454 when the Catholic Church legalizes slavery of Africans, as long as they are not Christian, as well as allows enslavement of Arabs and Muslims. Muslims near Europe at the time were mostly part of the powerful Ottoman Empire or other kingdoms, so going after them was not a strategic move, as well as Arab traders would later on become integral in the transportation of African slaves. This left Sub-Saharan Africa as the primary source of slaves, as it was relatively primitive compared to Europe. Also, the honor slavery in many African societies that was keeping the peace would ultimately lead to the downfall of so many tribes and cultures. Because what happened was the Arabs and Europeans came to numerous African leaders and offered money and weapons in exchange for slaves. Because remember, even though there was an honor to this form of slavery, the slaves were still chattel. This led to a system where a few select tribes would get rich and more powerful as they captured more and more slaves. With their new money and weapons, these tribes would literally hunt other Africans and force them into slavery. And of course, these slaves got sent to the New World. The slaves, while initially small in number, would be integral in taking care of the first major cash crop of the Americas, tobacco, a plant that when cured and ready to smoke would be worth more than gold when sold in Europe. But as we all know, slavery in America will sadly evolve later on. That is going to round out part 1. If you learned something, please hit the like button. If you want to learn more, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching. I'm Jim Huss. This is Killing Your Heroes. That's a fact, Jack, and you can take it to the bank.